What a story. What a wonderful story. For just a moment, will you give Jesus Christ a hand for helping us to know who God is? Thank you so much, God. Thank you so much, Jesus. Y'all, isn't it fun to worship in here all together, to experience the power, the energy of all of us united in worship together this morning? And I love the last song, Dory. What a wonderful, wonderful song, Man of Sorrows, that we were able to sing together. We have been listening for the past few weeks to the writer Luke. As Luke has been talking and sharing with us a moment in the ministry of Jesus where Jesus stood among tax collectors, stood among sinners, stood among Pharisees, and he told them all these stories in order to help them to understand the character of God and who God is and how God relates to all of us, his people. And sitting all around Jesus that day, there were very stingy, uncaring, cheating tax collectors. There were the elite aristocracy of the religious people. There were folks who were deeply poor and folks who were deeply rich. There were people there who were steeped in sin, and they didn't know how to get out. They were like the lost sheep, and they didn't know how to come out of the sinful situation that they were in. Some were single, and some were married. Some were recently widowed. Some were senior adults, and others of them were teenagers. So it was very much like the audience that we have here today. It was a huge group of all kinds of people. But no matter who they were, whether they were the preachers in the group or the businessmen in the group or teenagers or whoever they were, every one of them were in great need to understand the character of God so that they could be touched by it, so that it would transform their life. And so Luke is recounting this story so that they can know who God is in Luke 15. And I want to show you a picture this morning that demonstrates the moment, the climax of the moment in this passage of Scripture. It's the amazing painting. I love it. It is a painting done by the Renaissance painter Rembrandt. It is my favorite painting in the entire world. Now, in just a moment, Bubba, up there, if you're up there, there is another painting where you can see the brother standing to the side. If y'all find that, see if y'all can put that in there as well. This is the painting by Rembrandt. It is a masterpiece. Rembrandt painted this toward the end of his career. He painted it in 1969, and today it hangs in St. Petersburg. It is in a museum called the State Hermitage Museum there in Russia. And as you look at it, it's just an amazing painting, Rembrandt's interpretation of Jesus' Luke 15 moment. And you can see for yourself the wonderful moment of love and compassion. You see the Father holding on to the Son, the mercy that he's being shown to him. There's tenderness there in the face of the Father. There is forgiveness that's being poured out right there. It demonstrates the depth of Rembrandt. He is certainly able to understand the psychology and the insight behind the relationship that's been restored. He's able to understand the spiritual depth of restoration and how the Father is symbolizing who God is and with all of us. He's able to really paint the picture of what Jesus was trying to teach everybody in Luke 15. And there are several distinguishing features about the painting. One of them, if you were looking especially at the original that's hanging in St. Petersburg, if we were to see that, we would see a wonderful contrast of lighting. The Father and the Son, right there is light, and they stand against a background of immense darkness. It's as if the Father and the Son have left a place of darkness in their life, and indeed they have. In the story of Luke 15, it was such a dark place where they had been, where the Father missed the Son, and the Son was missing the Father, and they have come out of this very dark place into Rembrandt's light, into the light of restoration and into the light of God. Not everybody in the picture is in the light. If we were to be able to see just to the right, there is the brother that's there, and he is still in the shadows. The son who stayed is still kind of in the dark in the picture. We're able to see that. Also, we're able to see the different kinds of coloring effect. We're able to see the clothes of the return of the prodigal. And you see the prodigal there, and you see his clothes of their earth tones. They're very dingy and very dirty, and you see those in contrast to the very beautiful and crimson robe and the sleeves that hang over the Father, and it's almost as if he is caught up into the crimson red robe of the Father himself. It's just an amazing picture, and you see others in the picture as well. If the picture were a little bit wider, you'd be able to see the other contrasts of the colors as well. Now, another one of Rembrandt's paintings of the return of the prodigal son is this picture. Now, this picture, though, is the prodigal right after he left the father. And he has gone off, and he has all of his money at this moment, and he is living up the good life. Here is the partying son. This is before he runs out of money and before he finds the pig trough. It's before the Father runs to him, and here's what that moment is like. And what Rembrandt is trying to do is draw a little bit of a contrast between this prodigal and the prodigal you saw in the picture right before it, who is totally broken. He doesn't look like that at all anymore. And the greatest significance of this picture is that prodigal is Rembrandt. He painted his own image into the story. He painted himself. He looked in the mirror and he painted himself as the prodigal. You do know, don't you, that that's how you're supposed to read Luke 15. You see yourself throughout the story. As we have been exploring all of this the last few weeks, y'all, I preached on the prodigal himself, and then we talked about the son who stayed, and we called him the prodigal who stayed. And then last week we talked about the dad. And here's the question that I have for all of you who have made it to these worship services. Was there ever a moment while I've been talking about this where you felt where you were a part of the story? Did you see yourself perhaps as the prodigal, as Rembrandt does, or did you see yourself as the son who stayed, who was very envious, who wasn't able to give grace to other people, or maybe like the waiting father, where your heart's been broken, as we talked about last week, because somebody in your life treated you so badly and left, and you've been waiting and waiting to welcome them back with open arms. Where do you see yourself in Luke 15? Because that's the power of the story. If you don't do that, if you don't do what Rembrandt did and paint yourself into it, then all of this the entire sermon series on Lost and Found is nothing more than a nice story. And it gives you nothing to transform your life. Transformation happens in this passage just as it did with the Pharisees and the tax collectors that day when Jesus told it. The transformation happens when you see yourself in all of it. And y'all, in order to do that, you're going to have to let yourself go for just a minute. And to let go of a lot of things and to enter into this world of the prodigal son. I want to show you the older son. Let's see if we have it up there yet. Are we able to have the prodigal son? I mean the brother. Well, we're not able to see it. But the brother that's standing just to the right in that story, if you were able to see that, you would see an amazing contrast between his regal look and how he stands over the entire scene, almost in indignation, looking down at the grace being shown to the son. And so I want you to imagine it. We're not able to see it, so imagine it for a moment, that there is a son to the right. He has this big, beautiful beard, like a Ryan Taylor kind of beard. I mean, it is awesome. He has this beautiful hair, and he has this amazing robe that's on, and he just looks regal. And he is looking down with a very still kind of face, almost with his nose turned up at what's happening right there between the father and between the son who's just come home. His demeanor is one of frustration about all of it. And he looks very put together, though. He doesn't look like his brother at all. His clothes are not dingy. He looks regal as he is standing there. And for a moment, we're supposed to contrast the look of the older brother with the look of the prodigal, because here is the thing. The younger brother, the one that's there, who has lost his hair, do you see that? Do you see the clothes he has? The power of it is he used to look like the older brother who's standing there in the text. That's the way he used to look. He used to have the amazing beard. He used to have the regal clothes. And now he has come so far, and through the contrast, you're able to see how far the prodigal son has come from where he once was. He has lost everything. He doesn't look anything like what he used to look like. It's the journey, isn't it? It's the journey from how we get from one place that's very good in life to a place that is miserable and dark. Kind of like the young couple who gets married on their wedding day. And if you'll ever contrast the picture from that day to the day of their divorce, and you see this journey, and you see the young excitement, you see the happiness, and then you go all the way down to another day that's not near as happy. Or you contrast the way that somebody looks right at the beginning of a wonderful moment in life, and then they start to make all kinds of bad choices. They do things in life that are not healthy and they're not good. And then if you saw a picture of them there versus the picture of them at the beginning, you would see the journey. And that's what the picture is trying to show. The distance between the older brother and how he looked versus where the younger brother looks and where he is. Megan, I don't know where she found this, but maybe on Facebook or somewhere, but she showed to me this amazing story through pictures of people who were methamphetamine addicts not too long ago. And it showed a before and an after picture. And y'all, it was just awful. There were people who were before they got into that kind of lifestyle. And man, some of them were really very pretty. They looked awesome. Their hair was fixed. A lot of them looked nice. And there was life to their eyes. And it was somebody that you really would have thought, golly, they're going places in life. They're doing well. And then you compare that picture to the picture that they took in jail after they had been addicted to these methamphetamines, and these people who were once beautiful developed huge sores all over their face. It looked like leprosy is what it looked like, where parts of their face just looked like it was rotting. Their eyes were deeply sunken in. They just looked so bad. And in this story, Rembrandt is trying to demonstrate, here's the son who stayed, and here's how well he looked, because that's how the younger son used to look before he found the pigs, before he found the wildlife. And it shows a journey, how you can get from here all the way to here. And y'all know that can happen to you, don't you? You can go from a place that's very, very good to a place that's not very good at all. There is a journey to that place. And in the picture we see it. In the story of Luke we see it as well. We understand the transformation, the sad transformation that the young man has experienced. Now the older son, though, in this story, as you look at it, the older son who is there, it's amazing that even though he is looking down so regally dressed and so beautifully dressed, he looks down, but he is not in the light. The people who are in the light is the father and the son, which is an amazing thing, because you would think that if the older son stayed home and did what was right, that he would be in the light as well, but he's not in the light at all. The light is really shown on the father and the son. And the son has lost everything. His shoes are all falling off. He probably has a disease of some kind. He's not doing well, but yet he is in the light, and the brother is not. Why would the brother who stayed home not be painted in the light with everyone else? Well, he was where he was supposed to be. He stayed home with the father, and he worked diligently, and he did so well. But you remember, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. Even though he stayed home, he didn't like it. He was doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. And it wasn't that he stayed home out of his deep love for the father. He stayed home simply because he didn't know what else to do, probably. And he resented the father just as much. He resented his entire position in life, and so he was so mad. He was doing the right thing, but he didn't like it. There are some husbands who they come to church because their wife nags them to come to church. Now, none of you guys are like that in here at all. I'm talking about husbands, long South Texas husbands, who I'm talking about, not you guys, not hill country husbands, but there are some husbands, and they'll show up to church, and because their wife nagged them to, they're not there because of Sabbath. They don't understand what Sabbath does for their heart. And they show up, and you know what? They're envious the entire time of the other husband who gets to go out hunting on that morning. And they're envious of that husband who gets to sleep in. And they're envious of that other man who gets to get ready to watch the big game. They're in church, but they don't want to be. And they would rather be anywhere else sometimes than engaged in worship. It's kind of like the older brother. I know youth. There are some teenagers, and they show up to church not because they see that there's a benefit and an exciting thing in Sabbath, but simply because their parents make them do it. And thank you for that, parents. That's a good thing. It's okay. The only drug problem that's an okay thing is to be drugged to church sometimes. It'll do something for you in the future. But sometimes kids also, they don't want to go. They don't want to go to Sunday school. And you know what? They wouldn't want to go to school either sometimes if you didn't make them do that too. But very often, we'll do something that's right, but we resent it. We don't like it the entire time. And I think that's part of the issue with the son who stayed, the older son who's looking so regal and so put together, and yet he's in the darkness in the picture. He did what he was supposed to do, but he hated doing it the entire time. And through that, he became envious of his brother. The older brother, he couldn't even rejoice in the grace and the love and the gifts that his father did give to him. And his father had given him a lot too, but he was so envious of his little brother in the grace being shown to the little brother that he was incapable of seeing the grace that he was giving. And y'all, that's what envy does to all of us. You're not able to live in grace at all because we're envious of other people that are around us, and envious is so self-destructive. I think it's amazing that the older brother is not painted in the light, but he is in this dark place, and he doesn't have to be. Nothing, says John Wesley, nothing is more repugnant to capable and responsible people than grace. Grace. And the older son, he couldn't understand grace very much. He didn't understand it for himself and that he was given grace, and he certainly didn't understand it for this wicked, stupid son who squandered all of his father's money. And yet, right afterward, notice who asks his father. He says, "You haven't even given me a goat." He's saying, "I want something too." He's asking his father for the inheritance, and the loving father gives it to him. He said, "Son, all I have is yours. You want it? You can have it." The father gave the inheritance before he died to both of his sons. The older son then is in the dark because he doesn't understand grace, because he has missed the point because of his own envy. And in this story, the son stands outside and he refuses to come into the house. The father has to go out to him and say, "Son, please come into the house. We're having a party in there. Everyone is dancing. Everyone is excited. You're the only one who is refusing to celebrate." I've experienced that a little bit. I've been in a situation where there was a person who was so mad that something was happening in church while the rest of the church was experiencing revival. There was one person who refused to be involved. Refused to be involved and caught up in the moment of revival and the emotion and the Holy Spirit and what he was doing. So mad, caught up on all kinds of other things, and he just missed it. He wouldn't come into the house and experience it. That's what Jesus said about the older brother. He refused to come in. And so, in the same way, Rembrandt says this one is in the light. He's experiencing the celebration in this other one, though, even though he stayed home and even though he did right and even though he looks put together. His hair is all in place. He has beautiful clothes. He doesn't look like the prodigal, and yet he is in the dark. And the prodigal is the one who is in the light. There are religious folks out there, and you can do a lot of things that are right. And you can sing all of the right songs, and you can stand real holy at everything, and yet be in the dark rather than in the light, just like the older brother was. If you don't understand that every day you need grace, that you have not earned everything that you have been given. You are not a self-made man who pulled himself up by his own bootstraps and made his own way. That everything you have is from God himself. Every tiny minuscule thing, from the shoes you're wearing to your talents, everything that you've been having comes from God. And so every day rejoice in everything that you have that comes from the grace of God. Because when we don't do that, when all of a sudden we begin to believe our own hype, that we have earned all of these things and that we have done all of this stuff right and well, then what happens is we are incapable of giving grace to anybody else. This older son, you know what he needed more than anything else? He needed the pig trough too, don't you think? He needed a moment of brokenness, a moment where probably his hair falls out, a moment where he struggles a little bit in some way, and he is forced to be humble before the Father, and he comes and he throws himself down in the dirt at the Father's feet. He needed that moment too, but unfortunately, the older son never found that moment for himself. And so he stands there in indignation, looking down at the entire moment of grace that's been given away. Y'all, you need to understand the grace that's been given to you by the Father. And then you will never be envious of the grace that's given to other people. In fact, you'll be able to join them in the light. In the painting, the son, the prodigal son and the father is just one step away from where the older son is. The light that's shining on them versus the darkness where the older son is, it's just this far. That's it. And he could have been in the light too. There are Christians today, and they could be in the light if they wanted to. All they have to do is take one step toward it, and then they will be able to see. It's an amazing picture. It's good to be humbled. It's good to take a step into that light. I'll tell you, though, who understood grace in this text, the Father. Man, he understood it. Last week I preached on the Father, and I said that the Father is, for all of you who are here, you remember that we said it was like that tree that was covered in all of those red bows as that boy drove home on the train that one day, and he saw all of those bows all over that tree, and that is what God is like. That's the Father. That's God. It's what he understands grace. Look at this for a moment. Look back at the picture of the Father. There's the Father. He's amazing. His eyes are just closed, and he's embracing his son. He's pulling his son deep into his chest. Right before this embrace happens, the father is running toward his son. He's running, and so in that culture, because they would have these robes on, one of the reasons that men didn't run in that culture is that you can't run. It had something to do with your dignity, yes, but it had a lot to do with what you were wearing. You had this robe on, and you can't get a good, your legs don't move the way that it would if you had shorts, if you had pants, and so they can't. And so what they would do in order to run, they would do something very specific in that culture. The men who were going out to war would grab the under part of their robe, the back part of it, and they would pull the back part of it up, and they would tuck it into their pants, and they would build themselves shorts out of the robe. And so if you have a robe on, and you pulled the front, and you grabbed the back, and you brought that up and tucked it in, now you're able to run. So probably what the father does is he sees his son a long ways off, and he makes effort to get to him by readjusting his clothing. And then he begins to sprint as fast as he can and to run toward his son. And then he embraces him. Look at the picture. And just leave it up there. He stands there and he stoops, doesn't he? He's not standing tall. He's not bringing the son up to him. You remember the son comes and he's trying to rehearse a speech. He's saying, Father, I've sinned against you and I've sinned against God. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. And the father drops down to the son's level. And he is there with him. And he comes down to where he is. It's the character of God. Do you remember the greatest thing that God did for us? We call it the incarnation, don't we? As God stoops down to man, he clothes himself in humanity and becomes like us in the person of Jesus Christ. And he stoops down to us. And so picture this. Rembrandt is drawing this father stooping down as he is talking about what Jesus was saying in Luke 15, as Jesus himself is the incarnation through which Jesus stooped down to all of us. Jesus meets us where we are. One of my favorite songs is a song by an artist named Ross King, and he's crying out to God in this prayer, and he says, Lord, meet me where I am. Meet me where I am. That's a good prayer. It's a good prayer, y'all, because a lot of times we don't have the strength to meet God, right? We don't have the strength to reach up to him or to fix our situation. We have to have a God who meets us. And that's the difference in Christianity and in every other religion in the entire world. The God of Islam does not stoop down. Everybody has to do all of these good works to try to reach up to him, but we have a God who reaches down to us. And the Father stoops down. And I'm so thankful that Jesus painted this picture so that we can understand the character of God, moving, running toward us. Y'all, there are a lot of people who do not see God in that way at all. The early Stoic philosophers talked a lot about God. Plato and Socrates, Aristotle, during the Roman Empire, they had ideas about God, but it was not a God who stoops. Theirs was a God who is so strong and powerful. He is what they called immovable and impassible, which means you cannot stir his emotions. He decides if he's going to feel this way or this way. He's not moved by anything else. That's the God of philosophy that you have. If there's a creator God who created everything, then he must be so exalted and so big and so huge and sovereign that he's not going to be moved by anything. He's like a rock, and indeed he is all of those things. And the Old Testament talks a lot about how God is our immovable fortress. He is our rock. He is the one that we're able to really cling to and rely on because he is immovable. Yes, but there is another way to understand God, and it is that God is very movable by us. The Bible says that the Father was moved by compassion. He has compassion, and so he begins to run to his Son. He's moved. Jesus paints a very different picture of God other than the way that a lot of people in our world see God, as being a distant, immovable, strong God, but he is not very involved at all. The Father in this story, though, he's moved. He's affected by his Son. And y'all, you have a God who responds to you as well. No matter what you ever experience, you have a God who responds to your heart and who you are as well. It means that he answers your prayers and he hears you when you pray. And you may not always feel like it. You may feel like when you pray, your prayers bounce off the ceiling and come straight back to you, but you have a God who is moved by your heart. When your heart reaches up to him, he's reaching down to you. He meets you where you are. You have a God who runs to you. That's the kind of God that you have. That this morning, in just a moment, we'll come to an invitation that if you even attempt to get out of a pew and to come and pray, you have a God who meets you before you ever get to me down here in the front. There's a great story also that my wife shared with me that she saw during Hurricane Katrina. One of the most beautiful pictures of a father and a daughter, a father and a child relationship that I've ever seen. What happened was during Hurricane Katrina, there were news stations and reporters who were going all over that town, and they were looking for stories to report to the rest of us, the rest of the nation, about what was happening to people's lives in that moment. And there were some reporters who were driving down the road in New Orleans, and when they came up upon a group of people there along the road, they were just desperate looking. And the reporters pulled over, and they're not supposed to get involved in the stories that they're telling, but these reporters did, and they tried to help. And they pulled over and they said, "Can we help y'all with anything?" And it was obvious. This group of people were very, very lost in a difficult position. And they were musicians of sorts because a couple of them had guitars apparently. And they just looked like drowned rats. The clothes that they were wearing, they'd probably been in the clothes for a couple of days, 2 or 3 days. And they were dressed in black mainly, kind of a gothic kind of a look. Probably the kind of performers that you would see if you went down Bourbon Street in Louisiana and New Orleans and you saw a group of people sitting out on the street trying to play, and a few people flips them $1 or something. That's the kind of group that this was, just this little band of gothic kind of singers. And there was a girl, maybe about 20 years old or so, who was in this group there. And the reporters pulled over and they said, can we help you? And the girl said, do you have a phone? And she just looked awful. And the reporter said, yes. And she put a call in to her father. And you could make out a little bit of the conversation that she was saying. Apparently her father was a preacher in Illinois. And so you see kind of what happened. There was a moment when she told her dad, Dad, I know you want me to go to college, but I'm going to go and start a Gothic band on Bourbon Street. That's what I'm going to do. This is what's right for my life. You can kind of see the distance. And who knows how long it had been since she had talked with her father, and yet she starts talking to him. And you can hear from her side of the conversation what they're both saying to one another. And so the dad asks her, are you okay? And she says, yes, Daddy, I'm okay. And then they talk for a moment, and then her eyes light up because she hands back the phone and she tells them, my dad is coming to get me, coming to get us. And who knows how long she had been or how long it had been since they had ever talked. But she had this moment and this reconnection in the Father, man. The Father stops whatever preaching he's doing in Illinois, and he goes down, and he's going to meet his daughter. His daughter reached out to him through that call, and he runs to her, getting to her as fast as he possibly can. And at that moment, it didn't matter how she left the house, whether she said, you know what, I'm tired of you. I'm tired of you telling me what to do. I'm 21 now, and I'm going to go down to Bourbon Street, and I'm going to start this band and do exactly what I want to do. And I know that we have all this money in college that we have set aside in a savings account. I know that we have been doing that, but I want my money now. And I'm not going to use it the way that we had planned or the way that you thought I was going to use it. I'm done. And you can see it. And she calls her dad in that moment. And then her eyes light up, and she looks around as if she's being rescued right then, and she says, my dad is coming to get us. That's God. That's the image. That's what Jesus is trying to teach us about a God who loves us so much. And y'all, if you're a long ways from God this morning, a long ways, it doesn't matter that he is waiting for you just to glance up with a heart that says, I want to be back with you. Just a glance with a heart that's right, that wants to be close to him. And he will come to you because he has not forgotten any of you here. He hasn't forgotten your children. He hasn't forgotten your grandchildren. He is seeking you. The youngest son probably thought, I bet my dad has forgotten me. He's forgotten me. I'm here in the pigs, and he has forgotten all about me. And yet, the father never forgot the entire time. The moment that he sees him, the very moment, he starts running to his son. He can't get there fast enough. There is an amazing song that talks about God running to his son. Listen to this for a moment.
Almighty God, the great I am, immovable rock, victorious warrior, commanding King of Kings, mighty conqueror, and the only time I ever saw him around was when he ran to me, took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," and lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes with forgiveness in his voice. He said, "Son, do you know I still love you?" Caught me by surprise when God ran. The day I left home, I knew I'd broken his heart. And I wonder then if things could ever be the same. Then one night I remembered his love for me, and down that dusty road ahead I could see, well, it's the only time, it was the only time I ever saw him run. Then he ran to me, took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," and lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes with forgiveness in his voice. He said, "Son, do you know I still love you?" He caught me by surprise, and he brought me to my knees when God ran. I saw him run to me, and I was so ashamed, all alone and so far away. But now I know he's been waiting for this day. I saw him run to me, he took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," and lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes with forgiveness in his voice, felt his love for me again. He ran to me, he took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," and lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes with forgiveness in his voice. He said, "Son," he called me son. He said, "Son, do you know I still love you?" Then he ran to me. Oh, then I ran to him. When God
I can't even express the way that it feels when you have lost everything in your life and you have found nothing but pigs, and then you start to walk back, and your dad, who you've missed so much, he just starts running toward you, and you're embarrassed of how you look. You see your brother, and you even see servants, and they're all dressed better than you. And you think, I wish that I could come back looking different than this. But this is all I have, and you have nothing, and you just throw yourself at his feet, and you start begging. But I don't think there is any way that any one of you in here or me could have ever known the love of the Father if we had not seen him run to us. And he runs to us on the cross. He dies on the cross, and through that he runs to you, and he saves you exactly where you are. In Romans 5:8 it says, while we were yet still sinners, Christ died for us. And so we go to him, and I want you to know that you and I, we're the same. We're the same. The Bible says that on your best day, that your best works are nothing but filthy rags. Filthy rags is all you've got. So we all just come before Jesus in our filthy rags, and we fall before our God, and we allow him to give us something different and something new. And he traded out all of this stuff, and my hair grew back. And he gave me a ring that showed me that he was my dad, and he gave me a different robe to wear so quickly. He didn't even hardly let me get up to the house before he changed my appearance immediately. I felt almost as if I were an Old Testament character being given a brand new name. Like when God told Jacob, you are no longer Jacob, heel grabber. From now on, you are Israel. I'm changing the way you are, and I'm forgiving you of all of this. You and me, though we are the same, your works are nothing but of filthy rags. And we are all in need of the grace of Jesus Christ, standing before him, needing him. There is something that God did for me in this. He restored to me my dignity. See, when you start feeding the pigs for a while and you know that it's not where you need to be, you lose all of your dignity. You lose all of your humanity. I began to feel almost as if I was one of the pigs because I wanted to eat what they were eating. And I thought in my mind, I'm not a human anymore. I'm so poor. I have so little money. I see other people and that person looks human. That person looks human, but not me. I'm not human. I'm only part human. I may have arms and legs that look like a human, but I'm not. I'm just a pig. And you start eating with them, and you start trying to long to be right there with them, and you lose all of your dignity that God created you in his image. You do realize that, don't you? God created you in his image. You're a son and you're a daughter of God. That's what he created you to be. But sometimes sin comes in the way of life, and sin takes away all of the image that God created you in you. His image is lost because sin has obscured it until finally you don't feel like a son or a daughter of God anymore at all. You've lost his image and you feel like a subhuman kind of person. And that's where I was. And then I met the Father again, and he runs to me and he brings me to his chest. And at that moment, I begin to feel human again. I begin to feel that his image came to me again. Y'all, he restored my dignity as a human being, my dignity as a son of his, and he'll do it for you too. God will come to you and restore and bring you to a place where you are his son and you are his daughter, and you are so, so important to him. It's what he does for all of us. We come to him just like this. Why? Because it's all we really have to offer. You think he cares about money? Do you think he cares about your success or any of these other things? He looks straight to your heart and he sees a little boy or a little girl or somebody who's hurting or somebody who's missed it in some way. And he says, if you'll just be humble and come to me, then I'll make you everything. You give to me who you are with no illusion, humbled like you are, and I will make you everything. That's what the Father did for me. And that is what the Father will do for you as well. My story is lost on a lot of people. Jesus told it in Luke 15, and he told it to Pharisees, and he told it to tax collectors, and he told it to sinners, and he told it to all of these people, and it was lost on so many of them. So my question for the whole text of Luke 12 is this: Will the story be lost on you? Or will you see yourself in it? And will you leave transformed? And will you leave really being on fire for the Christ, the God who loves you, the God who is movable and compassionate towards you? Will you do that? Will you draw near to him with everything that you have, knowing that our King is returning, y'all? Our King is returning, and he's coming back to take all of us to himself. Will you go to him now? For just a moment, I want you to bow your heads with me. God runs to us. He runs. It doesn't matter how far you are off. He runs to you. Picture this. There are two boys, and they decide to skip church one day. And they get on their horses, and they're going down the beach, away from church, away from their family, away from what is right, as fast as they can. And it's a Sunday morning, and the bells of the church are ringing, ring, ring. They're ringing throughout the countryside saying, it's time for church, it's time for worship, it's time for Sabbath. Come, congregate together, be the fellowship together. And the bells ring, and the bells ring, and the boys are on a horse, and they're going away as fast as they can. They don't want to go to church that day. They don't want to be involved that day. And so they are leaving, and they're going away. And the further away they get, the softer the bells are in the distance of the church. Finally, they get so far away and they can barely hear the bells in the distance. They can barely hear them. And finally, one of the boys stops and he says, I must turn back. And his friend says, why? We have almost gotten away. He says, I know, but I'm going to turn back while I can still hear the bells ringing. If the bells are ringing for you to rededicate your life, to give your life to him, to join the light and come out of the darkness, to change something, don't be afraid. Allow there to be movement in the sanctuary today. First Baptist Marble Falls, let us come to Jesus. Don't go so far away until you can't hear him calling and the bells ringing to you anymore. Would you come to him just like you are? Your rags are perfect. Your rags are perfect. They're exactly what they need to be. Would you come and just bear them and allow the Father to minister to you? Come to him.